Welcome to Meaningful Jewish Living, our class on Shabbat. And we have entitled this three-part series, Shabbat, the Jewish Day of Rest, Rules, and Cholents. And it's very deliberate that we've entitled it this way. Cholent, of course, is that delicious stew that is a traditional Shabbat staple, certainly in the Ashkenazi community. Though for those Sephardim amongst us, maybe we'll have some hamin or something like that. But what we're trying to do in this series is really, it's three parts. It's rest, rules, and cholent. The first part is about the rest, the celebration of Shabbat. And we're going to look at that this evening. There are sources that you can link to in the chat, that we're going to talk about the celebration of Shabbat. That will be this evening's subject. Next week, we're going to talk about the rules, the obligations, the laws of Shabbat, mainly the things that we don't do that enhance our celebration of Shabbat. And in week 3, we're going to make Cholent together. Actually, probably not, but anything is possible. In the third session, we'll talk a little bit about going through the order of Shabbat in a practical way, as well as any questions that come up between now and then. Will be a chance to kind of have a living learning tutorial of a celebration of Shabbat. So I can't guarantee there will be Cholent there, but we will try and go through some of the demonstrating what Shabbat is like, from some of the songs and the rituals and the prayers and the like, and to have a little bit of a taste of Shabbat on a Thursday night. So for those of you who've been attending this series on other subjects, this is kind of a standalone 3-week exploration of Shabbat. As usual on Zoom, if you have a question throughout, feel free to type it into the chat, raise your hand, anything like that, so we can really study together. So we're going to get underway. As I mentioned, this is about the rest of Shabbat, not the remainder of Shabbat, but the rest, the relaxation component of Shabbat. And recognizing that the celebration and the feeling of Shabbat, the enjoyment from Shabbat, is probably the most popular part of Shabbat. So for example, you don't find too many Jews who will say, "Oh, it's difficult to have a Friday night dinner." Doesn't happen that often. Celebrating Shabbat is enjoyable, it's natural, it's pleasurable. Less so if we talk about some of the rules of Shabbat, some of the obligations of the Shabbat, the things that you can't do. There are certainly things that people miss on Shabbat that they would maybe rather do because it's hard. So there's a certain, we can, for lack of a better term, we can call it the positive, we can call it the celebration, we can call it the religious experience, the spiritual part of Shabbat. These are just different ways that we can look at it, and we're going to do it from a textual perspective. So text number Roman numeral number 1 is, we're going to talk about how Jewish tradition highlights the beauty of Shabbat and what's really this essential function of Shabbat. So source number 1 is Nachmanides, the classic commentary of Moshe ben Nachman. We're talking active in the 13th century. So his commentary to the Torah, where the Torah introduces Shabbat, it's a mitzvah to constantly remember Shabbat each and every day, so that we do not forget it or mix it up with any other day. Through its remembrance, we shall always be conscious of the fact of creation at all times and acknowledge that the world has a creator. This is a central foundation in belief in God. So Nachmanides here is stating that Shabbat is much more than about a certain day on the week. It's not just about Saturday. It's not just about what we know as how we would celebrate or enjoy Shabbat. Shabbat is every single day, constantly. Right? We don't generally think of Shabbat as constantly. We think of Shabbat as a slice of the week. We think of it as a certain time period. On some level, maybe we get a little cognizant of it as the clock is ticking on Friday closer to sunset. But Nachmanides said, no, Shabbat is constant. We're always thinking about it each and every day. So we don't forget it nor mix it up with any other day. And not only that, it's the idea of being conscious of creation, and it's about belief in God. And so what we're seeing here is the idea that Shabbat is not just a ritual observance. It's not just one day of the week. It's an essential foundation of a Jewish belief system. And the Talmud sometimes talks about someone who observes Shabbat is keeping the whole Torah, and someone who desecrates Shabbat is denying or ignoring the whole Torah. The idea that Shabbat stands out as much more than an observance, much more than a celebration, much more than Kiddush and Motzi, much more than Cholent, much more than rules and regulations. It's being Jewish. It's the essence of our recognition of God as creator and our belief in God, who is creator of heaven and earth and everything that is therein. And we'll see time and again that this is why Shabbat is often equated with the rest of Judaism. So, for example, there's an expression, Shomer Shabbos, which is Hebrew for one who observes Shabbos. Shomer Shabbos is a synonym for Orthodox or observant Jew. Now, Shabbos is one day a week. You can observe Shabbos and not keep a whole lot of other things, right? You can keep Shabbos and maybe you don't keep kosher. You can keep Shabbos and maybe you don't pray daily. But Shomer Shabbos, someone who is really observing Shabbos fully, the celebration, the obligations, everything that we'll talk about the next couple of weeks, we generally assume that person is an observant Jew because, as Nachmani says, it contains within it, it encapsulates all of Judaism. So if you're observing Shabbos, you have a proper appreciation for belief in God. If you don't, you're not. So Nachmanides is elevating Shabbos above and beyond any of our other ritual observances. Source number 2, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan in his book Shabbat, the Shabbat, which is a great book. The Hebrew word for faith is emunah. Right? We've seen that. Ani ma'amin, I believe. Emunah, faith. It comes from the same root as uman, a craftsman. Some people hear the word uman, they think of Rav Nachman of Breslov because he's buried in Uman. We can have another conversation about that, the Hasidic component. But faith comes from the same word as craftsman. Faith cannot be separated from action. But by what act in particular do we demonstrate our belief in God as creator? The one ritual act that does this is the observance of Shabbat. Shabbat is the prototype of Jewish observances that demonstrate our faith. Some of you, we studied together the crash course in basic Judaism in the fall, where we spent a lot of time talking about creed and deed, religious experience and religious obligation. And we spoke about how the foundation of Judaism is a connection to God. And we articulate that connection to God through prayer. And Shabbat is an example of how we demonstrate, how we act upon our faith in God. And the one example that I always give to reflect this, the fact that recognizing that our faith in God is demonstrated sometimes by our actions, whether or not we pay attention to it, has to do with Shabbat. Because observing Shabbat very often will demonstrate that we have faith in God. Classic example of all of this was how in the early 20th century, when there was so many Jews coming from Eastern Europe, there was a major challenge whether to observe Shabbat or not, because the work week back then was a 6-day work week from Monday through Saturday. And it was not uncommon for a Jewish immigrant worker to be told by their boss on Friday, I'll see you tomorrow on Saturday, or don't bother coming in on Monday. And basically people had to choose Shabbos or livelihood. And interestingly enough, the Hashkama service, the early morning Saturday Shabbat service, which many shuls have earlier, right? Usually on Shabbos, the services start later. People don't have to be anywhere that quickly. So 9 o'clock is a very popular time to start, 9:30, whatever. Some people want to go earlier, so they have a 7 o'clock service, 7:30, whatever it is. Some of the earliest Hashkama services on the American Jewish scene were people who had to work on Saturday. They wanted to pray properly first, so they would pray at 7 and then making sure they could open their stores or make it to their jobs by 9 o'clock. But it's a major choice. Do I observe Shabbos, or what about my livelihood? When a person recognizes that God is in charge of the world, right? If God is in charge, our livelihood doesn't come exclusively from what we work at. Our livelihood comes ultimately from God. Doesn't matter whether you work 5 days a week or 6 days a week. God is ultimately in charge. And the parable I like to tell with regard to this is there was someone walking down the road in the forest carrying a very heavy sack on their back. And a horse and wagon comes up behind, and the person driving the horse and wagon says to the guy walking, "Hey, buddy, come on, I'll give you a ride. We're going in the same direction." So the person carrying their sack is very appreciative and gets on the wagon next to the owner, next to the driver, and they continue going down the road. But the guy driving the wagon realizes that the guy who he had picked up was still holding the sack on his shoulder. And so he says to the guy, "Buddy, take a load off. It's okay, relax." And the person who had been picked up, who was holding the sack, said, "You don't understand. I really appreciate the ride. The horses, it's kind enough that they're carrying me. I don't want them to have to carry my sack. I'll carry my sack." And of course, this is ridiculous because the horses are carrying the weight regardless. And the parable is really about the same thing with God. If God is in charge, then we don't have to work on Saturday to make the living that God wants for us. Now, of course, it's a major test of faith, and we can't judge people who may not be able or ready to give up their effort to make sure they have their livelihood. And of course, we know we're supposed to do what we can, but as Jews, we sometimes have to defer our desires to what God wants in the situation. So when we're talking about, though, here, this is what Aryeh Kaplan is saying. Observance of the one ritual that demonstrates our faith is Shabbat. So Shabbat for Nachmanides is an essential element in our Judaism. And it not only is this every seventh day, it's also an acceptance of God as creator, as well as belief in God. And as Aryeh Kaplan takes it a little bit further, it's really the best, it's a prototypical example of our acting in accordance with our belief. And all this together can help us understand why this idea of being Shomer Shabbat, Sabbath observant, is kind of parallel with or identified as being a fully observant Jew. Right? The serious Jews keep Shabbos the whole way. Could be true, but really observing Shabbos in its fullest form is a statement not only of commitment to action, but also to belief in a relationship with God. So that's the essential function of Shabbat. And if we go back to the sources, we go back to how the Torah introduces Shabbat, we encounter Shabbat as one of the 10 commandments, and how we observe Shabbat is presented in that statement of the 10 commandments. But the 10 commandments are mentioned in the Torah twice. This week we're starting Parshat Shemot, the book of Exodus. Jews will get out of Egypt and receive the Torah and the 10 commandments on Sinai. In a couple of weeks, we'll read that story. And there we read Exodus 28. We're in Roman numeral 2. Remember the day of Shabbat to make it holy. Zachor, remember the Sabbath day to make it holy. The 10 commandments are then restated in the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. At the end of Moses' life, Moses recounts the story of the Jewish nation. And part of that story is to restate the 10 commandments. And of course, it's the same 10 commandments, but a different word is used for Shabbat. There it's shamor, safeguard, observe the day of Shabbat to make it holy. So you have Zachor and Shamor. Zachor, to remember. I like to explain this by saying, what are the things that we would encounter that would remind us that it's Shabbat? And maybe even backing up a little bit more, what happens if somehow someone, was in a coma and they wake up and they don't know what day it is? What might they encounter that would remind them that the day is Shabbat? What are the Sabbath reminders? What are the Shabbat reminders that we encounter? What are the things that we will notice that will tell us that this must be Shabbat? Any thoughts?
Well, I
Not
mean, if it's
using
Friday night, you have the
technology.
candles. Oh, no
Candles.
technology.
I think that's great. Now, once upon a time, if it was dark, you had candles, but especially now when we have electricity, candles, that's something that's unique to the Shabbat. What else might be a Shabbat reminder?
Challah.
Challah bread, right? You want bread during the week, you have a loaf of bread. You have challah bread, it's a reminder, it's a signal that it's Shabbat. So other things like that, a Kiddush cup being used to drink the wine, right? We have our wine in glasses. On Shabbat, we put it in the special ceremonial decorative cups. So I once did this exercise with students in the third grade at Ramaz. And one of the answers that was given was, everyone's eating dinner together. So that, I thought, was a bit of a sad commentary on the very busy lives that we sometimes lead. Maybe things have changed because we're all stuck with each other, but I don't know. But the things that remind us that it's Shabbat, that's the celebrations of Shabbat. Shamor, how do we safeguard the holiness of Shabbat? Well, that's where we stop and we observe and we follow the commandments, the rules and obligations of Shabbat. So we have the Zachor, the remembrances, the celebrations, and we have Shamor, our fulfillment of the obligations. And these ideas, we call them Zachor and Shamor, or sometimes when we sing about them on Friday night in the Shabbat service, which we'll talk a little bit about, we call it Shamor v'Zachor. These are two sides of the same coin. Shabbat is about both. And even if the celebrations might be more popular than the obligations, these are integrally connected. So our celebration of Shabbat has elements of our spiritual side and also of our action side. Okay, so Shabbat's essential function, remembering and safeguarding, two sides of the same coin. As I said, this week we're talking about the rest, the relaxation, the soul of Shabbat. So let's look more deeply into how Judaism really appreciates the spiritual side of Shabbat, right? And this isn't something that necessarily tastes good or smells good, but really something more spiritual. So we're in Roman numeral number 3 on the sources. And we're starting with source number 1. It's from the Talmud in the tractate Masechet Beitza. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, the Holy One, blessed be he, gave man an additional soul on the eve of Shabbat. And at the end of Shabbat, he takes it back. What does this mean, an additional soul? So the commentary of Rashi, source number 2, an additional soul, a greater ability for rest and joy, and the added capacity to eat and drink more. So this Rashi is the source of one of my favorite teachings about Shabbat, is that, Shabbat, of course, is about the food and the drink, but you can eat and drink as much as you want on Shabbat and you will not gain weight because you have the added capacity to eat and drink more. Your extra soul is there to absorb the calories. And it's true, 100% true. The problem is, as the Talmud says, that extra soul departs after Shabbat and it leaves behind all the extra calories. So until we can find a way of getting the soul to take those extra calories, we're kind of stuck. But this is the idea that Shabbat provides us with a certain element, a certain spiritual sophistication. And that spiritual sophistication does extend to our culinary enjoyment of Shabbat. And I would give a couple of examples. One, there's a certain, for those who are regulars in observing Shabbat, there's a certain rhyme and rhythm to the menu of Shabbat. Right, Shabbat meals classically in the Jewish tradition have all these courses, and you have the soup and the fish, and you have to have the chicken and the rice and the vegetable. There's a certain culinary feast that's part of Shabbat. And my wife always mentions this. When it regards in the weeks leading up to the holiday season, you have all these morning shows which will tell you how you can survive the preparation of your Thanksgiving meal. And she always says, and it's true, that Jews do this every week. And not only do we do it every week, we do it twice on Shabbos. And then think about when you have the 3-day festivals, right? This year, Passover is going to start on Saturday night. So you have Saturday, Sunday, Monday. That's a lot of eating. But it's kind of, we do, you don't, Thanksgiving, that's nothing. We do it every week, twice. That's why that's what the that's why the people always talk about pardoning the turkey. The chicken has it much worse in the Jewish tradition. Turkey once a year, chicken 3-4 times over the day. But there's a certain enjoyment rhythm that there's certain Shabbosy foods, to such an extent that sometimes I can't eat that during the week because that's a Shabbos food. And so that's, one element of the extra soul. The other, the spiritual sophistication also exists for our tolerance, our patience for some of the spiritual things on Shabbos. So for example, prayer services. During the week, we're always in a rush, 30, 45 minutes, chick-chock, we're done. Saturday morning, we recognize that we'll spend more time in shul. And people's patience and attention spans have, diminished over time. And especially, during COVID, those services which are meeting in person are shortening or making things more curtailed, more compact. But still, like we realize we're going to read several chapters of the Torah during a Torah reading. We're going to spend some time listening to a language that we don't really understand all the words. Sometimes we don't understand any of them, but we have that tolerance. We get into the rhythm of celebrating Shabbat and doing things which are not out of the ordinary weekday activity, whether they be physical, whether they be spiritual. So that's the soul of the day. And Rabbi Mordechai Becher captures this in his Gateway to Judaism, which is a fantastic book about Judaism in general. And also you'll notice at the end of the source sheets, we have a couple of, for further reading. Shabbat creates a sanctuary in time which we are forced to suspend our normal activities and reevaluate the importance of our daily concerns. We are offered the opportunity to turn our attention to those areas of life that are too often neglected. Shabbat is the one time that the entire family can get together without the pressure of school or work, without the intrusion of the phone or television. A common expression coined in the 20th century attests, more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. And associated or attributed to Echad Ha'am, the Jewish writer, right? There's a sense that we need Shabbat. Rabbi Haskell Lookstein, Rabbi Emeritus at KJ, always likes to invoke the idea that if Shabbat had not been commanded to us by God and become a Jewish ritual, someone would have, in this day and age of craziness, would have invented it, patented it, made a lot of money off of it. But we have Shabbat as a way of elevating our everyday activity. And so while it has a fundamental religious function about God as creator and having belief in God, and it has a lot of action that help us demonstrate our connection to God, it really is that soul of the day that makes it different, that we appreciate when we have it. And also, it actually leads to the fact that when we lose it on Saturday night, we feel it. The idea of losing the extra soul on Saturday night is part of the explanation for why the Havdalah ritual on Saturday night involves the spices. The spices are a certain kind of spiritual smelling salt. We feel the loss of that soul, and the samim are there to elevate our soul and to help us steady ourselves now that we've lost the extra soul that we have. Source number 4, you can read it on your own, from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who passed away recently. Talks about how Shabbat provides a tremendous mechanism for educating the future. The idea that we have, that it creates a certain environment that it helps create kind of the foundation for Jewish continuity. And it just, he gives the example, he mentions bringing a British childcare expert to Jewish school who saw how people were having their Shabbos parties on Friday. And they said that they love the fact that the home environment is more serene. And it just highlights kind of a technical element of Shabbat that that can be found in observant Jewish families. Even young children come to appreciate these elements that we're talking about. Again, anecdotally, I sometimes feel that it's exposing the little kids to the Shabbos cuisine gives them an appreciation for a certain taste that they wouldn't normally have at a young age, or certain types of behavior. Children who grow up observing Shabbat learn at an early age certain things are forbidden on Shabbat. And again, we'll talk more about that next week. But for example, electronic toys are not to be played with, and it's very interesting. It's endearing. It's very illuminating to see. Sometimes you have kids who come from different backgrounds, and let's say at a more observant family, a child from a less observant family will start playing with a toy that's electronic, and the child from the more observant family will say, no, you can't play with that on Shabbos. You're not talking about rabbis and congregants. You're talking about 4-year-old children. So it has a certain the idea of the extra soul, but that extra soul provides an environment, and not only an environment for our own appreciation, but a training ground, a proving ground for instilling basic Jewish values going forward. So that's thematically speaking, that's the soul of the day. Within Judaism, often the soul is expressed in actions, and so we try to do that as well. And so we're going to look at the positive commandments of Shabbat. Positive commandments, we're up to Roman numeral 4 on our sources of Isaiah 58. We talk about this we read this as the prophetic portion of the Haftorah on Yom Kippur. If because of Shabbat you restrain your feet and refrain from accomplishing your own needs on my holy day, if you proclaim Shabbat a delight, the Holy One of the Lord, honored one, and you honor it by not engaging in your own affairs, by not pursuing your needs, nor discussing the forbidden, then you shall delight with the Lord, and I shall mount you upon the heights of the world and endow you with the heritage of Jacob your father, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. So here Isaiah introduces the idea of Shabbat being a delight, Shabbat being holy. And then the Talmud in Tractate Shabbat, which is the tractate devoted to the laws of Shabbat, highlights some of the other things that Isaiah said. What does it mean to honor Shabbat? So source number 2, your garments should not be like your weekday garments. Right? There's such a thing as Shabbos clothes, right? We nowadays we're in much more informal times, but this idea of having Shabbos clothes. When I was a little kid, I was known as the 3-year-old who wore a 3-piece suit and tie even in the summer. Now that doesn't mean that's obligatory, but it made for a very interesting scene that walking next to next to the guy in the summertime wearing shirt sleeves, I'm the one wearing the 3-piece suit. Maybe, but nowadays, suits aren't necessarily as formal attire. We have different standards. But the idea of having Shabbos clothes, some people, they have every single item of clothing they're special for Shabbos, because it says honor it with special clothes. The Talmud says, what does it mean not to engage in your own affairs? The way you walk on Shabbat should not be how you walk on weekdays. The idea, the Talmud explains, this is about trying not to be in such a rush. You're not supposed to run on Shabbos unless you're running to shul to hear the rabbi speak, or running to shul to daven. That's also okay. But the idea, you're not supposed to run on Shabbos. Why are you in such a rush? There's no reason to be in such a rush on Shabbos. Some of you know Rabbi Buchwald from NJOP, the outreach organization. So they did a video one year, and someone was telling a bit of a story, so much so that sometimes, this was in Manhattan, there's the Shabbos way to walk and the weekday way to walk around some of the neighborhoods in Manhattan. The Shabbos way to walk is to avoid, to try and walk in the way that you won't encounter as much traffic or as many people walking in the streets, right? In Manhattan, it's very hard to find quiet places. But you go out of your way to find the quieter place. You won't be distracted by the world around you. So that's, another element of treating Shabbos differently. Not pursuing your needs, those of your affairs that are forbidden on Shabbat, but is permitted to pursue the affairs of heaven, right? It's not a time for working. It's not a time for business. As it says, nor discussing the forbidden. Your speech on Shabbat should not be like your speech during the week, right? Talk about Shabbos-related items. Some people actually, in some families, this led to a practice of speaking Hebrew on Shabbos. Speak a holier language, speak a more Jewish language on Shabbos. Some people take this as far as they don't want to read secular literature on Shabbos. They'd rather only study Torah. Again, everyone finds their comfort zone of their approach, but this is the idea of what it means to treat Shabbos in a special way. And the Talmud is sensitive to Isaiah's language, and the rabbis have given us various instructions on how to optimize our Shabbos. So that is, if we're talking about the positive commandments of Shabbos, Isaiah is the source for the rabbis and giving us instructions on let's treat Shabbos special. And sometimes that requires extra effort on our part. It involves engaging in certain things and maybe refraining from certain things. And again, we're not talking about the classic don'ts of Shabbat. We're not talking about the 39 categories of work, which we'll talk about next week. This is in our celebrating Shabbos and our resting on Shabbos. We're sensitive to have different types of behavior. Questions, comments on anything that we've been seeing so far, whether it be our intro or the soul or the activities that we're engaging with that help the soul of the day flourish. All right, and, as we keep going forward, you're certainly welcome to unmute or to put into the chat any questions or issues you want to raise.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So what is considered a forbidden topic to discuss during Shabbat?
So look, I think that the two people talking about a deal and how they're going to have a transaction that they will be able to finalize after Shabbos is not something that should be spoken about. You'll find people, who will say you can't read the business section of a newspaper because it's Shabbos, you can't be doing business. But I think that, but if you certainly to discuss a deal and the activities that will be engaged with after Shabbos and making plans later on Shabbos on that type of a subject, certainly would not fit in to this the direction the rabbis are taking Isaiah's words at. But there are books and books written about this. There's a whole series of books, published by Art Scroll, but one is about the Shabbos kitchen and the Shabbos, and the radiance of Shabbos and the beauty of Shabbos, right? The idea of, sometimes the way for the soul of Shabbos to express itself most is by regulating our behavior on some of these ways. But in terms of two people talking about a business deal that they're definitely going to transact immediately after Shabbos is probably not good. It's not a good conversation.
Got it. And also, so if you are Shomer Shabbat, but let's say if you break it, is there something that you're supposed to do to kind of make up for it, or do you just kind of continue?
Well, first, you mean after the lightning comes down from heaven and strikes you?
Yeah.
Okay. No. So look, the goal is that we try to be the best that we can be. Look, in temple times, there were sacrifices that were brought as forms of atonement. We have Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, as a time to try and correct. I think that there's currently no specific actions that can be presented as this is what you have to do. The one exception that exists is that there's a whole discussion that if someone purposefully ignores lighting Shabbos candles on Friday, there's this idea of adding another candle each week afterwards forever. Kind of your punishment for ignoring the Shabbos candles is to have to light more candles. But otherwise, the goal is to do the best that we can. Yes, Ruth.
I thought that at temple times, that's where they used to go to on Shabbat. They used to go and meet everybody and make connections and talk about things. Wasn't that more of just a praying, more of a camaraderie?
So in temple times, the temple was definitely much more of a gathering place. Keep in mind that on Shabbat temple times, the temple was mainly a place for sacrificial activity. And the works and the rituals performed by the Kohen and the Levi, and sometimes that was a spectator sport, but it had a very different vibe than what we think of as a shul today. there was very little for the average person who wasn't a Kohen or a Levi, or certainly for women to do very much of. And Shabbat people were, and we'll talk a little bit about this next week, Shabbat people were limited how far they could travel. Hence, synagogues developed much earlier, even during temple times, because people couldn't go anywhere on Shabbat. But so the idea of the temple as a central meeting point existed, less so though specifically historically on Shabbat.
Mhm.
And that led to in many ways that led to the growth of synagogues, because you imagine if you had no shul to go, meaning a lot of us can imagine that these days, but remove synagogue attendance from the Sabbath observant person's day. Right? People go to shul Friday night for an hour, Saturday morning for 2-3 hours, Saturday afternoon for an hour or two, right? I have been told by people who have told me how hard it is to observe Shabbat. It's so hard, and especially people who don't necessarily have a mechanism of socialization, it gets even harder, right? If you don't have anyone to talk to, and you don't have anywhere to go, and you don't necessarily have the appreciation for the rhyme and rhythm of Shabbat, it's, sometimes people think it's, as one colleague of mine liked to say, it's 25 hours of not tearing toilet paper. We'll talk about that next week. But the idea, you need sometimes the scaffolding of these rituals that, okay, I'm supposed to talk differently. But what does that mean? So some of these rituals and some of this guidance is there to provide a little structure to that.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit more. We're moving to page 3, Roman numeral 5, Oneg, the idea of party time. Oneg is a party.
Rabbi Weinstock?
Yeah.
Before you move on, can you just explain, because I'm very confused about the concept of the extra soul?
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it.
Well, are you fully comfortable with the idea of your first soul?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so it's important. As long as you have that down, you have to be. It's based upon a soul. So I think that, look, without trying to go more deeply into this idea of what a soul looks like or is, there's a sense. There is a very spiritual way of understanding this, which means we have a more expansive openness to God's blessing in our lives, which elevate us to feel comfortable doing all sorts of things which we normally wouldn't do and don't necessarily make sense because we're on a higher spiritual level. Or, one way I would just understand it is it's a certain enhanced spiritual sophistication that, usually my prayers are 30 minutes, and this time I'm open to them being 3 hours. It fits, it makes sense. And same thing with the food. Right, normally I'm, not really. I'm much more careful about, whether it be portion control or snacking. And look, you think of the menu of many synagogue kiddushes. It's not necessarily the healthiest food. Let me tell you, the vegetarian cholent doesn't go, nor does nor do the sugar-free cookies. They're there for the 1 or 2 people, but so I think if we're looking for a practical explanation of the extra soul, it is that those who are engaged and are open to trying Shabbat and celebrating Shabbat and observing Shabbat develop an openness to a series of religious experiences, whether they be spiritual or physical, that really don't necessarily make the most sense to the outside observer. That's how I would look at it. So let's so Isaiah also mentions this idea of oneg, of having a party. So this also is expressed in intangible, technical, legal terms. Rambam, Maimonides, laws of Shabbat. It's an obligation to light candles for Shabbat. Both men and women are required to have lit candles in their homes on Shabbat. Even if one has no money for food, should go from door to door begging for oil to light candles for Shabbat, as this is included the mitzvah of taking delight, oneg, in Shabbat. Before lighting the candles, one is obligated to make the blessing. So this idea of enjoying Shabbat is an obligation. It's an obligation to light candles, to have Shabbos candles. And it's an obligation to have them, so much so that we push a person to beg in order to have the light in the home. Now, this is something that's harder for us to appreciate. I think we mentioned this before. We have electricity. We have a certain, we don't need the light the same way, but it's important to celebrate Shabbat to be able to see what's around us. And the way to make sure to have light is to have the candles. And getting a little bit to the idea of the soul of Shabbat, I think that, we were talking about things that remind us that it's Shabbat. Candles remind us that it's Shabbat. What would happen if I would have you come to my house on a Friday night and we'd sit down for the Shabbos meal and there were no Shabbos candles anywhere? You definitely would be curious. You may not really ask, because you don't want to ask the rabbi where Shabbos candles are, but you'd be curious where the candles are, because the candles are a demonstration of this idea of celebrating Shabbat. It's the idea of light, the idea of being able to see the other people, the idea of being able to see the food. It creates a nicer environment. And so here too, the Jewish law provides direction of how to have oneg, of how to celebrate Shabbat. Rambam continues, Maimonides, source number 2. What is the delight of Shabbat? This refers to the statement of our sages that a person should prepare especially delicious food and special drinks for Shabbat, according to what he can afford. The more one spends on Shabbat expenses, the more one prepares tasty food, so to say, the more praiseworthy it is. A person is obligated to eat 3 meals on the Sabbath, one in the evening, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. One must take care to ensure that one eats no less than the 3 meals. Even a pauper whose meals are provided by charity eats 3 meals. This idea, the food is important. Now, the food can be taken to the extreme, right? Thank God we live in a very blessed age where you go to a kosher store and you could have like 16 types of hummus and 27 types of dips. And, it depends on what's popular out there, which kinds of herring. And now they have Litvish herring and they have Hasidic herring. We have all to, we live in a blessed world. All it takes is having to have been to any type of celebration or catered bar mitzvah or a Shabbos affair, right? I don't know, which ones you've experienced. My favorite is you come and you have the kugel bar, where it's 6 different types of kugel. If you don't know what kugel is, if we have time, we can talk about it. There's actually, I'll share one thing about kugel. Kugel, Jewish food. Sometimes they call it like pudding. Like a noodle kugels, noodle pudding. I see Anais likes it a lot. Oh, yeah. But kugel, well, how does that have it? Why? So here, for those who speak Hebrew, you might appreciate this. I'll try to explain it for those who don't. In Hebrew, the word kugel is Yiddish, but it could come from the Hebrew k'igul. K'igul is like in a circle. Igul is a circle. And it could be that the name of the food came from the fact that it was prepared in circular pots. Now, you may be thinking, well, I make my kugel or I buy my kugel in rectangular pots. You're not Jewish. No, you are Jewish, but the idea it originated, it was called kugel because it was a circle. And even if it's not in a circle, the name still sticks. Okay, so these are the meals of Shabbos, and it is important to appreciate the food element of Shabbos. Let's just skip for a minute onto the next side to Roman numeral 7 for a minute when they talk about the Friday night meals, right? That's what we're talking about. The fact that there's the different types of food, whether it be the fact that we have 2 challah breads, or even the fact that sometimes fish is a Shabbos food. All of this is based upon the Rambam. Maimonides talking about having different types of food. And some of the Jewish food is culturally, historically, depends on the community tastes and spices in different geographic locales, but also some of it was based on necessity, socioeconomic issues, right? The different types of, if you take cholent as an example, you throw in whatever you got, you cook it for long enough time, you don't even know what's in it. You don't have to, you can put in all sorts of ingredients and maybe you wouldn't really want to talk about, you put them in the cholent because 24 hours of cooking makes everything look the same. Or gefilte fish. Gefilte fish, the idea of gefilte fish, fish have bones in it. Removing bones on Shabbat is something that can be complicated, as we'll see next week. You grind it all up, there's no bones to remove. Plus, you get more bang for your buck. When it comes to Shabbos meals, Roman numeral 8, source number 2. Our master, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, the author of the Mishnah, made a meal for Antoninus on Shabbat. He served a cold dish. Antinous tasted it and he liked it. Antinous then made a meal on a weekday, served a hot dish. You'd think the food would be better. But Antoninus remarked to Rabbi Yehuda, what you served me before was better. Rabbi Yehuda told him, this food is missing a particular spice that my food had. Antoninus then queried, but couldn't there be anything missing from the king's storehouse? Rabbi Yehuda answered him, yes, it's missing Shabbat. Do you have Shabbat? Right, there's a certain taste of Shabbos that exists. And again, even if it's not something tangible, it's the different ingredients, it's the types of foods, it's preparing the foods. In the Jewish tradition, there's even an idea that tasting the food on Friday is a special custom, is a special tradition. And so it's the idea that the meals and the menus and the spice all are an extension of how we celebrate Shabbat. So, so that physical enjoyment is an important part of it, and the physical enjoyment itself is ritualized in a way of having the 3 meals on Shabbat, and the physical enjoyment is contextualized and understood as having there's a certain taste, and there's certain foods that, like I said before, it's very hard for me to imagine eating cholent on a Tuesday night. It just doesn't fit. So these are the meals, and obviously, the meals, Friday night, we appreciate it, it's dinner time. Shabbos lunch, maybe a little less so because it's, maybe you don't usually eat a big lunch, but still it works. The Sudah Shlishit, the third meal, harder sometimes to appreciate, especially when the days are so short. You have, finish lunch at 2 o'clock, who wants to eat again at, 4:30. And in many ways, the third meal has developed a kind of reputation as being a very spiritual affair. Maybe that's because there's less interest in eating food, but Sudah Shlishit has acquired this idea of capturing, it's the last gasp of Shabbat. As Shabbat, quote unquote, as Shabbat ebbs away, we're looking for an opportunity for holding on to Shabbos for one more time, for one more minute. And that's why the third meal, Sudah Shlishit, even though some synagogues develop a certain culture of serving crackers into an efficient egg salad, that's culinary out of necessity. But also, if you look in the liturgy, and we'll do this in our third session, it makes a major shift towards more spiritual ideals. We're trying to hold on to the soul of Shabbat for as long as possible. Let's just go back again to Roman numeral number 6 and Roman numeral number 7, page 3 of the sources. Kabbalat Shabbat, Roman numeral number 6, is Shabbat begins automatically. Sunset Friday at Shabbat. However, there's a tradition, Talmud Shabbat 119a, right? Rabbi Chanina robed himself and stood at the sunset of Sabbath Eve and exclaimed, "Come, let us go forth and welcome the Queen Sabbath." Rabbi Yanai donned his robes on Sabbath Eve and exclaimed, "Come, O bride, come, O bride." This to us resonates with the idea of like L'cha Dodi, what we sing. And at the end of L'cha Dodi, on Friday night, we actually turn, and almost as it is, we're turning to greet the Sabbath, as if it's real. And so there's an idea of recognizing that even if Shabbat is, the amount of time of Shabbat starts at a certain time, ends at a certain time, no matter what, the whole package of Shabbat with the extra soul and the setting that we're trying to create deserves a little bit more pomp and circumstance and preparation. And that comes from this idea of Kabbalat Shabbat. And that's has certainly turned in the last several hundred years in the Jewish tradition of the liturgy that we're used to, in the songs that we're used to, and certainly in the last generation or so, even longer. If you go back to the early 20th century, when there was not as much traditional Judaism, Friday night was the time that people were able to get into a Shabbos spirit. So whether it be more singing or whether it be a little bit more openness to more spiritual experiences, we have that on Friday night, and that has a long tradition dating all the way back to the Talmud. Let's just talk for a little bit about Kiddush, right? Kiddush is, on the one hand, that's what we call the food that they serve on Saturday after davening, but Kiddush, from the word sanctification, it's a law. It's one of the rules of Shabbos. Maimonides says we're now Roman numeral 7, Rambam, source number 1. It's a positive biblical mitzvah to verbally sanctify the Sabbath day, as the verse says, remember the Sabbath day to make it holy. That is, one should make known its praise and sanctity, and do so as Shabbat comes and as it goes out, with Kiddush when it comes in and Havdalah when it goes out. It's not enough for Shabbos to start and end. We want to get in the proper spirit with the Kabbalat Shabbat, and we actually have to say, it's Shabbos. And saying it's Shabbos, it has morphed into the Kiddush ritual. Why do we need a larger ritual, not just saying it's a holy day? So source number 2, Sefer HaChinuch, the book of religious instruction. That's why we're commanded to recite Kiddush with wine. For the nature of a person is aroused when he feasts and is happy. Right? There's a long tradition throughout civilization about the celebratory aspects of wine. In the Jewish tradition, the King David in the book of Psalms, V'yayin yisamach levav enosh, wine has the ability to gladden the heart. Even this, culturally, even when wine didn't taste good, like there's plenty of good kosher wine now. You go back 100 years, all you had was this very thick, syrupy, sweet stuff. But you make Kiddush, that's considered, in a sense, it's toasting the Shabbos. And so Kiddush is not just a ritual, it's an obligation, and it's an obligation that's meant to add a little bit of joy, a little bit of celebration. And even when Shabbos ends and we are not so celebratory, we still acknowledge the fact that it was. In a sense, we're sad that it's gone, but when Shabbat ends, we're celebrating the fact that we've had the opportunity to enjoy. Questions or comments or thoughts before we just make a few concluding points? Yes.
This is Victoria. I was wondering what your thoughts are on the view of Shabbat as also a celebration of the fact that Jews are.
It's a little hard. It's a little hard to hear you, or at least for me. Maybe if it's not coming through, if you want to type it, the question, if we can't hear you, that's also please do so.
Could you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, I just put in my headphones. Yeah, so I was wondering what your thoughts are on the view of Shabbat as also a way of celebrating the fact that Jews are no longer slaves, that Shabbat is a representation of the freedom from the demands of the mundane, and essentially the fact that Jews are free to press pause, which only truly liberated people can do. I think it's also a great way to celebrate God because he was the one who liberated the Jewish people and they owe him their freedom. So Shabbat is a way to commemorate that connection and that gratitude. I thought it was like a kind of like a poetic way to think about it, but I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
No, so I would say absolutely. It's actually a good segue into next week's discussion, because especially if you go back to that early source where we compared the two statements of Shabbat as being presented in the commandments. One is remember and one is safeguard. So when it mentions remember the day of Shabbat, it remembers the day of Shabbat because God created the world in 7 days. So there's an aspect of Shabbat that we celebrate Shabbat just as a religious experience, the same way we relate to God as a faith experience, as a religious experience. When it says to safeguard Shabbat, the reason we safeguard Shabbat, the verse in its entirety, you can look it up in Devarim chapter 5, safeguard Shabbat because God took us out of Egypt, the house of bondage. So the safeguarding, the following the rules is because God took us out of Egypt. And, the idea of God taking us out of Egypt, and this is something else we talked at greater length about in the crash course of basic Judaism, but briefly, God taking us out of the land of Egypt is where God took us from under the thumb of one master and commander, and God became our master and commander. So these two ideas of Shabbat, the religious celebration because we connect to God as creator, and the religious obligation because we connect to God as master and commander, are two interwoven themes of Shabbat. And they are being expressed exactly as you say, whether it be from the liturgy and from the activity. And sometimes there's an intermingling because on some level, all of our following of obligations is based upon the fact that we believe we have faith in God. And so I think that the Exodus element of Shabbat is front and center. is certainly there to be found, especially with regards to our obligations of Shabbat. Idea of creation is there when it comes to our religious experience. And actually, both of these terms are reflected throughout, especially the Friday night Kiddush. We express Shabbat as being Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit, memorializing creation, and Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim, remembering our exodus from Egypt. Because these two themes, which are parallel and sometimes butting heads, but ultimately are meant to be woven together, are expressing themselves on Shabbat. In particular, the Exodus themes of God now as our master and commander will definitely focus on, especially next week when we talk about the laws and obligations and rules of Shabbat.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or points you want to cover? All right, so just a couple of words on Shabbat prayers. Shabbat prayers, there are 4 periods of prayer on Shabbat. This is also how we celebrate and part of our resting on Shabbat, even though it's a ritual activity. This is Roman numeral 9 on the page 4 of the sources. We have Kabbalat Shabbat, which is we accept Shabbat, and that's an extension of the Talmudic expression that we saw before. Shacharit, where it's a daily morning service. We pray in the morning 365 days of year. On Shabbat in particular, we have the Torah portion of the week, which is an opportunity to more deeply learn the lessons that God wants to give us each week. Also, the morning service is expanded in the different themes of a morning service, which we don't have time to discuss morning prayer. There's another, we can talk about that in other sessions. But the idea of the prayer is where we speak to God. Torah is where God speaks to us. And both of those experiences are engaged in deeply at greater length on Shabbos morning. Musaf is the extra service. Musaf literally means extra. And Musaf is an opportunity to remember, and the Ruthus gets back to your point before, temple times, because that's where the sacrifices were brought. It certainly brings a double dose of our reconnecting with our land and with Jerusalem in our past and our history. Of course, the larger issue of how we can relate to sacrifices today when we are so far removed from them creates a little bit of tension, and we can't fully unpack that now, but that's something that exists, attention throughout Jewish prayer whenever we have this extra service, but on Shabbat in particular, where we have more time, we're willing to engage in this exploration more. The Mincha, the afternoon service, I call it coming attractions because the Torah, first piece of the next week's Torah portion is read, and the 4 prayer services of Shabbat, the Amidah, the main prayer of each service, each blessing has a unique character, and the character of the Mincha on Shabbat afternoon is the future. And so even as we're ending the Shabbos day, we're always looking ahead towards the future. And then, Havdalah Malav Malka, Saturday night has turned into in Jewish tradition, in Jewish custom, and Jewish ritual, that the fact that we find ways of extending the holiness through additional beauty and celebrating and music, right? Havdalah is meant to be, we recognize that Shabbat is over, we have to go back to the week, but how can we straddle the fence and bring Shabbat into the week? Anyone who's participated in this time in all these, singing musical Havdalot, you can watch them all over on Zoom and on Facebook and everything like that. You can appreciate, when you have if you take the spiritual experience of the Shabbat day and try to express it with music and song afterwards, it can be very beautiful. That's a reflection of that Shabbat was so beautiful. And then this idea of even having a Malava Malka. Malava Malka is to escort the queen, and it's turned into the term that is used to describe having a little Saturday night food, right? How much food can you have? Well, we never run out of reasons for Jews to eat. But this idea of let's take it even further. It's almost that we've extended Shabbat not just to the afternoon and Havdalah, but can we take it further out? And this makes sense because of the fact that, as we saw, if we conclude with where we started, as Nachmani said, Shabbat is not meant to be a day experience. It's meant to be something that permeates our soul, creates a foundation for our faith, and a springboard for our involvement in Jewish ritual. So with that,